This is Michael Clara coming to you from Salt Lake City, Utah with update number 3 to the Spencer Cox signature list cover-up. In this particular update, I'm going to focus on Brian McKenzie, the Davis County Clerk. My original posting on this issue, Spencer Cox signature list cover-up, you can go view it on YouTube. It was posted about a month ago. In update number 2, I went through a timeline of how this cover-up has unfolded. In this one, if you see here on June 27, 2024, there was a Salt Lake Tribune article titled "Phil Lyman Continues Casting Doubt on the Results of the 2024 Republican Gubernatorial Primary." And then we get a response from Davis County Clerk Brian McKenzie, whose office verified signatures on Cox's petition, explained in a Facebook post that the verification process is extensive and not open to the kind of manipulation Lyman claims. So I want to focus in on that in this update. You can go read another story, July 3rd, 2024, from the Salt Lake Tribune if you need to get more background on this. And what I want to start here is on, or at least remind everybody about September 3rd, 2024, when the state auditor audited the signatures, did a limited audit. And one of the things that he points out, he says, statistically, it is possible that each candidate might have fallen short of the statutory requirement in the validated population of signatures based on our projected numbers of possible exceptions. And in update number 2, I went through those numbers and showed how a validation rate, well, I'm not going to repeat all of it, but you can go look at update number 2 if you want to see how I arrived at the conclusion using the numbers that and methodology that the auditor used, that Spencer Cox was indeed short of the 28,000 threshold for signatures that he needed in order to be on the ballot. And I also point out that, what Phil Lyman and Natalie Clausen had been saying is confirmed by what the auditor pointed out in that September 3rd audit. And I'll refer to that some more in this presentation. But just to remind you, and it's important to see the sequence here as we talk about the involvement of McKenzie, the clerk from Davis County. On February 20th, Governor Cox puts on X that he has the signatures needed, that he's reached the 28,000 or beyond that threshold, and he's going to turn in his signatures. What we learned from the auditor, state auditor, in his September 3rd report, he says that looking at March 15th, he says Cox had submitted a smaller number of additional uncounted signatures such that we determined additional tests was needed. But the part I want to show you here is in the middle. He says, we note that those uncounted signatures had been submitted on or before March 15, 2024. After validators completed this work, we determined, so he goes on, but the point I want to make here is that it's from the audit of September 3rd that we learn that the county clerk in Davis County had completed counting these 28,000, or it was more like 33,000 signatures, but which allowed Governor Cox to reach a threshold. There's also another date, March 15th, which is just 3 days off, and it's an email that Ryan Calley, who is the director of elections, sent to Natalie Clausen, and he says here on the bottom, the Cox-Henderson campaign submitted 592 additional signatures that were not verified once the required 28,000 signature threshold was met on March 18th. So just keep that in mind. It's important to understand that these signatures get turned in on February 20th, and by March 15th or 18th, the clerk in Davis County, who is given this responsibility to verify signatures throughout the state of Utah for this election cycle, he's done by March 15th or 18th, depending on who you're going to believe, because these guys can't get their story straight. But let's go with either one. The problem that I see is that on March 19th is when a contract was signed. They call it an interlocal cooperation agreement, was actually signed between the lieutenant governor's office and the county clerk. So what I find troubling with that is, I don't know if they did that on purpose or what the reason is for it, but it appears to me that the county clerk did not have the authority to be reviewing signatures because, and I'm not going to go into this law, but if you want to look it up, 20A 9408, you can look at that and compare it to what the contract says. But here's my concern. I don't understand why all of Governor Cox's signatures get counted by the clerk in Davis County, and then the day after, or two or 3 days after, Ryan Calley, who is the elections director, signs a contract with the county clerk in Davis County to actually do the work that they already just did. And so I don't know what they were trying to hide, or if it's just like sheer incompetence that the clerk is doing this work without a signed contract. And I believe that this is some procurement issues are a problem here, because, well, you can see for yourself what my concern is, that the county clerk is using the authority granted to him by the lieutenant governor, and that he would hire people and that he's going to get paid for this or reimbursed for the expense. All that work that he had done for this whole month was done without a contract in place. And then let's go to move forward. We go through April 27th. We get to the primary. And as you recall, Phil Lyman wins the delegate vote by 67.5%. Then a month later is when the Davis County clerk sends the bill, or the invoice, if you will, to the lieutenant governor's office to get reimbursed for the expenses he incurred doing the signature verification. And we recall that, he tells us that, and I'll go over that memo again. And this is kind of what I did, kind of working out the numbers here, kind of, going backwards, if you will, and kind of figuring out, if you pay somebody $25 an hour, he probably had about 29 people working for him for about a month trying to verify these signatures, I'm guessing. But as I was doing this video, getting ready to do it, I got a response to grammar request late this afternoon that kind of verifies this estimation here. And I'll come back to this. On June 21st, there was an article that came out where they're quoting McKenzie, where he says that that McKenzie says here in the middle, on Friday afternoon, McKenzie published a statement on the Davis County Clerk's Facebook page detailing the security process of checking signatures. He said all the candidate petitions were delivered directly to his office, where they were stamped and reviewed by at least 2 workers who had passed a criminal background check and received training in signature verification. And keep that in mind about this training that he's claiming happened. He actually posts a memo saying the same thing. And then he points out in this memo on June 21st, there have been questions. And again, he's challenging, as everybody knows, he's challenging Phil Lyman, who's calling into question the signatures verified on the Cox petition. And here McKenzie says there have been questions raised about the validity of candidate petition signatures verified by Davis County. I affirm that each signature was reviewed by trained election workers and either validated or rejected in accordance with the requirements set forth by law. And what I'm going to point out, that's a lie, but he said it. I further affirm that each candidate who qualified for the ballot through the process submitted a sufficient number of valid signatures. And then he says, throughout the verification process, as is the case with any personnel working in elections, all persons working on petitions were required to pass a criminal background check and attend state and county signature verification training. He's right about that. They were required to do it. That doesn't mean the people that were working for him did it. On September 3rd, going into that audit that John Dougal did, he says here, and I'm focusing in on this supposed certification by the people working, and if you saw, when you saw in that contract, they were going to hire temporary workers, and they did, to the tune of about 30 of them probably, is what they hired, and they were required to pass a certification for signature validation. And right here, John Dougal repeats that. He says, we note that he's writing this to the Lieutenant Governor. We note that your office provides an online signature validation course on the principles and techniques of signature validation, which all validators are required to complete. Each validator must pass an assessment with a minimum required score. This appears intended to provide greater consistency of signature validation performed by different validators. And he says, prior to beginning our signature validation review, we completed the same online signature validation course required for validators as we reviewed, and he goes on. So what that looks like is, I did a grammar request to a couple of county clerks here in the state of Utah, and this is what it looks like from Washington County, who I've been interacting with the last few months. I did a grammar request, and each of their employees in the office, I get one of these things here that shows that the election administrator, that she says, I've completed the following signature verification trainings provided by the Lieutenant Governor's office. And basically what this says is that there's a 2023 training course, and then there's a 2024 training course. All that means is that the 2023 training course was created last year, and it's relevant last year and this year. And you see here on the top, it says signature verification training must be completed by all staff prior to doing any signature verification and must be completed each year. And then this year, they added another course to it, the 2024 training with document examiner. So these two are required in order to be certified and get your certification for your signature verification training. So I do a grammar request to Davis County, and I get only one person did the full course. And then you see down here, we have these redactions. So to me, this is significant that you have an election worker who's temporary, and that's the only person out of 36 personnel, which includes the temp workers, that actually completed the full course and received the certification. So that's stunning. I was shocked, and I hope that people watching this are just as shocked that you end up having, and as you can see here, Cox turns his signatures in February 20th, and the only person out of the 36 personnel that I received forms for, this is the only person that completed the training. There are two others that completed the training, but they're not signed or dated by the clerk. So I don't know what that means. They just have checks in there, and then everyone else is incomplete. So and to me, that's stunning. That of all the that he has a contract with the state of Utah to verify signatures, and he knows it's a requirement, and he declared it that it was a requirement, and he lied. And then John Dougal says that they were required to do it, but I guess he didn't check either. So basically what I did is kind of looked at the numbers in terms of what McKenzie billed the state, and I could kind of figure out that we know that it took 18 work days that they had the Cox signatures from February 20th to either March 15th, would be 18 work days, and it probably 3 to 4 people a day were counting Cox signatures for the month between February and March when they had them. That means that, I don't know, if this one person, they were doing other signature package, but we only had one person in this man's office that actually was certified to be doing the signature validation. So I think that might be part of the problem that we have with the validity rate that why there was such a high number of 85 validity rate of all the signatures that Cox turns in March. But in August, when John Dougal is doing his audit and he has the employees at the Davis County go look at these unviewed signatures, they come up with a validity rate of 66%. And now that makes sense to me, that in March they had temporary workers that were not certified looking at the signatures, and that's why they have this inflated number of validity rate, because they weren't trained properly, they weren't even certified, and then they're temp workers looking at this, so they came up with a higher rate of valid signatures. In August, it's full-time employees looking at it, and they know that the county clerk is going to look at the numbers or look at what they come up with right after that. So in essence, what ends up happening is when they reviewed the unviewed signatures, they came up with a validity rate of that group of 66%, and I think that's the reason why. The other interesting thing I want to point out is that in the email to Natalie Clausen on June 19th, the director of elections says the Cox-Henderson campaign submitted 592 additional signatures that were not verified once the required 28,000 signature threshold was met on March 18th. Had more signatures been needed, the campaign had an extra month until April 15 to supplement its signature submission to secure a place in the primary election. Like, who cares? But at any rate, that's what he tells Natalie on June 19. What I found fascinating is that on September 3rd, John Dougal uses the same language, explanation, or excuse, if you will, by saying down here in the footnote, as such, Cox had ample time to collect additional signatures had the validators indicated more were needed to meet the statutory threshold. And I'm sorry, I missed the first part of this. He says state statute required a candidate to submit signatures no later than April 15th at 2024 at 5 p.m. So you see, it's interesting. This is their narrative because, it's odd that an auditor in September would echo the same language that the director of elections who works for Cox is saying. And really, from an audit standpoint, that doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. And from a director of elections, it shouldn't matter. Just like nobody cared that in southern Utah that ballots were mailed in and ended up with a postmark that was extended because of the post office. But all of a sudden over here in Salt Lake, we're supposed to use a different standard and give some kind of, excuse. Well, he had time. Well, we all have time. It's what we do with it, what counts. And again, Governor Cox did not have the signatures needed to be on the ballot, and he fell short of it because I believe you had incompetent, not by their own, they're not by any fault of their own, but you had incompetent temporary workers who were not trained or certified, I should say, to even look at the signatures. And that's why I believe we had a problem to begin with. And at some point, these guys realize that, and then the cover-up starts. And then they want to gaslight Phil Lyman and Natalie Clausen for stating the obvious, that even John Dougal comes to the conclusion, yeah, Cox didn't have enough signatures. I think Callie knew in June that Cox didn't have enough signatures, which is why he said, had more signatures been needed, the campaign had extra month, right? Because you knew in June that he had not met the threshold, just like Phil Lyman and Natalie Clausen were saying. I want to close with this interesting article that just came out last week. It's the Elections Office reports discrepancies, high signature rejection rates in Utah County. This is just incredible that the Lieutenant Governor's office is going to go south into Utah County and do an audit, and then say that they found a high rejection rate of signatures on mailed ballots in Utah County. And I think this is just, she's trying to do a sleight of hand, and I'm making this update to just tell people, don't fall for it. Don't worry about Utah County. So don't worry about their high rejection rate. Let's worry about the low rejection rate that occurred up north in Davis County by those clerks, or temporary workers, I should say. And that's what we should keep our eye on the ball and worry about that. Worry about the fact that the clerk in Davis County was working without a signed contract or any kind of legal agreement between the Lieutenant Governor's office and his office. We should worry about the fact that the Davis County clerk ends up with uncertified workers, temporary workers, counting signatures on a signature that they're supposed to be certifying. So that's the problem here. And so with that, I want to encourage everybody, when you get your ballot, write in Phil Lyman and Natalie Clausen, because if Governor Cox stays in office, and we're just going to get more of this corruption, and we're going to be stuck with it for another 4 years.